The Transmission Company of Nigeria has announced that the national grid has been restored. The TCN explains that the power outage is suspected to have been triggered by the unexpected tripping of 3 units of a power generating station, which suddenly removed 330 megawatts from the grid, causing system instability that led to the loss of bulk supply to a section of the national grid. The system operator reacted to the sudden drop in generation by separating the section of the grid, which includes the Ibom power station, through which the company continues to feed Uyo, Aba, Itu, Eka, Calabar, even when the other sections of the grid had no supply. Also, the operators commenced grid restoration efforts immediately after the incident. Currently, the entire part of the grid affected by the incident has been successfully restored. However, despite the restoration of the grid, Nigerians are worried about the incessant collapse of the national grid, which leads to power outages in different parts of the country. Joining us now to discuss ways of averting this constant menace is Engineer Lateef Onikoyi, former site engineer electrical supervising the European Economic Community's EEC-sponsored rural electrification project, and former consultant to the Rivers State Ministry of Power. He will be joined from Port Harcourt in Rivers State by Rumundaka Wonodi, former managing director and chief executive of the Nigerian Bulk Electricity Trading PLC and CEO, ZKJ Energy Partners. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us on the morning show.
Good morning. Good morning, Dr. Abati.
Thank you, Mr. Onikoyi.
Good morning, madam.
We understand that Engineer Wonodi will join us later, but you are here with us. Well, this grid infrastructure that is always giving us problems. Well, the Transmission Company of Nigeria, they are saying, well, it's partial disturbance. It's not total collapse. We've only had one total collapse this year. Should the infrastructure even collapse at all? To the point that it got to about 0.88 megawatts, down from about 4,000. Now, the government came up with Electricity Act 2023 and came up with Electricity Act 2024, giving opportunities to state governments so that, there will be it will not just be the federal government involved in the value chain. Now, why has that not worked? Or is it because the law is still new? You have been consulting for Rivers State. Now, what other options do we have? Renewables. The Electricity Act of 2024 talks about renewables, talks about off-grid. Where are we with that? Because this centralized national grid is not helping anybody, no matter what explanation the TCN offers us.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Abati. The grid is made up of 3 components: the generation, transmission, and distribution. You can have collapse. What is collapse? Like from the normal literary meaning of collapse, a sudden fall due to pressure. Collapse in terms of electricity means reduction in the available energy. So, now, when there is a power collapse, like the one that just happened, so many factors will affect to it. Could be from this generation, like the generator coming down. And for the generator to fail, there are so many control systems which could have, but they did not tell us why the generator failed, shut down. Something might have led to it. It could have been gas supply, which they don't want to tell us. It could have been any other thing. Majorly, we usually have the collapse He is right by saying it's a partial collapse because we have not had, we have not been having grid failure in Nigeria. If we have that, it will take longer time to restore. So for them to have restored this quickly, that means it was a partial collapse. And why the state government have not, we have not seen the effect of the, I want to, let us be factual, or let us, I'm not trying to defend the grid system or the system operators. Is any system working in Nigeria today? Which system has not collapsed? Has the road not collapsed? Do you have water in your houses? Pipe-borne water in your houses? Nigerians, we have been made to, for example, we need at least, if we look at the basic need in terms of electricity of Nigeria, we need at least between 40,000 to 50,000 megawatts, not considering industrialization, the basic need. A family, let's assume a family of 6, you need at least 5 kilowatts. Divide 200, let's assume we have 200, as they say, 200 million population. Divide 200 by 6. You know the number of millions you have. Multiply that by 5 kilowatts. You will get nothing less than 50 megawatts. That is what we need. And we are talking about 40. The installed capacity of generation station in Nigeria is just between about 11,600 and something, less than 12,000 megawatts. That's the installed. But the available is just about 4,000. Compare 4,000 to 40 to 50,000. That's just about 10%. That's what is available. And distribution also contributes to collapse. If you draw more, let me give you an example of your generator in your house. If you put on your generator and you load it more, the generator will shut down.
Well, Engineer Onikoyi, I understand Engineer Wonodi has joined us. Good morning, Engineer Wonodi, and thank you for joining us. Good morning.
Thank you very much.
Well, before you joined us, yes, thank you. We've been discussing this grid, collapse, partial collapse, failure, and Engineer Onikoyi was just saying, well, it can collapse at any point, transmission, generation, or distribution. But in your opinion, what other options do we have? Should we just decentralize the national grid? Is it possible to decentralize it? The law, the Extant Law Electricity Act, talks about other options. What can we do to prevent this kind of situation, which is embarrassing in a country of over 200 million people?
Thank you very much again for having me. So the very first thing is that I didn't follow the earlier discussion because we are getting set up here. But you know that you have a collapse in the system when the supply side and the demand side are out of balance. And typically what you would have as a stopgap measure is to have what we call ancillary services within the system and have some form of operating reserve. So one of the reserves that you have is what you call the spinning reserve. So it's like having another car that is in neutral, and then if there is a need, you load it up. And typically in most reliable systems, what would you have is that if you're generating about 4,000 megawatts, you should have at least about minimum 5%, but optimally 10% spinning reserve that would be idling. So that when on Saturday we lost 313 megawatts, we would have had that 350 idling that should just come back up, right? So that is one of the key missing things. So if you look at it in a system where we do not even have enough to generate and distribute, then it is difficult to make the point that where we're looking for revenue, that you just have about 300 megawatts idling. So just that in context. But decentralizing the grid would be nice. I don't believe that decentralization of the grid leads to higher reliability. As a matter of fact, people try to have a bigger grid to make it more reliable. But in the case where the state governments and the regionalists believe that they have the capital to make the investment and island their states, then it's a good way to start. You can start from ring fence and then grow bigger. But under each ring fence, you have to make much more investment to have that more stable than having a larger place. So, for instance, Aba IPP, the geometric project, has power for the network. That could be a model that would work. But as anybody knows, it does require investment, and many states have to recognize that they'll have to build new transmission lines and reticulate that with the distribution to make that work. So yes, it is possible, but the cost is quite, it's not the most efficient way to get about it in terms of financing.
Well, so while we're looking at these conversations about feasibility, I'll come back to you in studio, Engineer Onikoyi. The president last week decried how, I believe the word he used was shameful, it is that we have 4.5 gigawatts of power generation. 4,500 megawatts, which is 4.5 gigawatts. And he tasked, this was at the inauguration of the Presidential Economic Council, and he gave them the task to increase that to 6 gigawatts or 6,000 megawatts in the next 6 months. Now, I just want to set that next to the fact that in July 2019, the federal government signed a deal with Siemens AG that was supposed to have taken us to 25,000 megawatts in 6 years. Yet here we are, we're three years into that deal already, we're 5 years into that deal, and no development has been made. So realistically, in the next 6 months, can we get to 6,000 megawatts? And if so, what needs to happen for us to get there?
Okay, I will take that from, if the president is ready to declare a state of emergency on electricity and give out funds to bring in the generator, but it's not as easy as he said from the practical point of view. Most of these equipments are not on-shelf equipments. You need to design, manufacture, before you bring them in, and it takes time. And you have to queue for you to get it. So, politicians will tell you, we will do this at this time. But the reality is that, is it possible? We have fewer manufacturing companies all over the world manufacturing this equipment. Very few. And the whole continent, or the whole world need electricity. So you even have to queue for you to get this thing manufactured. So I don't know what magic the president will expect. Maybe somebody have told him that he has this thing in stock that is going to give the government. I will be able to talk about that. But what I know is that the government of Nigeria have not added value to our electrical system. They've not added any value to it, even with Obasanjo. Because we have a situation, Egbe is almost 40 years old. Egbe is operating at less than 30% efficiency. And that is the highest, that's the biggest power plant we have in Nigeria. Egbe is the biggest, but it's operating at less than 30% efficiency. Same with other. So we have the dams and so on that are even over 50 years old. The few ones that were just during the Obasanjo, that were commissioned during the Obasanjo's time, what value have they added to the system? I am aware that even the national grid, the transmission network, the national transmission network, since 1982 had not been extended. It has remained stagnant since 1982. They've not extended the national grid in terms of transmission. And we are talking about improving electricity. Good, the state government can come in, but like my fellow engineer said, do they have the capacity?
Okay, while you say that, quickly to you, Mr. Wonodi, if you can hear me now, what needs to happen if the president's directive is to come to fruition? That is, for us to move from 4,500 megawatts to 6,000 megawatts in the next 6 months.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear. Have you heard my question? Shall I repeat myself?
I thought you were saying what would happen if the president mandate that we get to 6,000, how would that help?
I will rephrase myself. What are the conditions that need to be satisfied in order for the directive that has been issued by the president, which is that the Presidential Economic Committee should move us from 4,500 to 6,000 in the next 6 months? How can this be made a reality? Or is it impossible?
Well, there are a couple of things that you need to have in place, right? The first thing is to be sure that you have the adequate transmission network and distribution network so that when the power is generated, you can push through the 6,000 megawatts through the system. So that is one. The second is that you should have adequate gas supply to power the generation companies. And it will mean putting in place firm contracts and not just interruptible temporary contracts. They have to be firm contracts that guarantees gas going to these generation companies. And of course, if you have that, it must be paid for. So you have basically the intractable issues in the sector having to be addressed within this period. And it's not a big task. I think it can be done if there is pure leadership and focus on what needs to be done.
Okay, couple of things. We all know all these problems. But how about the inefficiencies in the transmission company of this country, which we have, gone on many ways to fix? At some point, we had even brought in the Manitoba group, but it's not just worked. The transmission company of this country. I'd like to come to you, Mr. Wonodi. Can you talk us through the inefficiencies in that system?
Well, I think the very first thing is we have to think about how investments are made in the transmission company and the transmission space. Primarily, it is budgeted for through the national budget. They receive some stipend or some contribution from the market. And therefore, that to a large extent influences where these investments are made and, again, whether there is value for money for such investments, right? So that is one of the challenging things, which was why a lot of us pushed for the creation of the independent system operator that should have a system planning and then make the determination of where investments will be made to serve the industry, the country, much better and more efficiently. So the fact that the chairman of House Committee on Power or Senate Committee on Power is from particular locale or state, there's a tendency to want to take projects back to his community, even if there is no need for that. So you have stranded transformers and feeders that are in places where do not serve the market. So that is one primary source of inefficiency that you have. The fact that the budgeting and then the funding comes from the national purse instead of coming from the market. Now, can the market of 4,000 megawatts actually fund the transmission company? It is very challenging, which is why many of us keep talking about the fact that we need to ramp up the generation, because all this cost on 3,000 megawatts, 4,000 megawatts is unsustainable. You wouldn't even say it's unsustainable, it's inadequate. And then we have the new issues of the states coming to set up regulatory commissions that will be paid by the same 3,500 of 4,000 megawatts, right? So it's important that even where we're creating state electricity commissions, that the states make the investment to wrap up supply to the homes and businesses so that they can generate the revenue to take care of the cost in the industry. Sorry, I'm struggling with this.
Okay. So the inefficiencies in the transmission, because you see, remember you read out a contractual agreement, which was simply with the Siemens is supposed to be able to boost this transmission architecture and infrastructure and get some more generators in, which boils back to the transmission, how we can move power around. The inefficiencies in that system.
No, I have just told you that the last time the national grid, that this transmission was improved, was about 40 years ago. 40 years ago. What efficiency do you want? And the population keeps increasing. The demand keeps increasing. What efficiency do you want from that type of obsolete network? That is, you see, when you talk about inefficiency, you want us to look at the human being. It is not this. Not in fact, Nigerians engineers to an American is like a magician because of the environment they work in. A Nigerian engineer to an American, we go over there. They will listen there. We know what their system. When they see what we work with here, the environment we work with here, they say, you people are magicians. Because the government had not spent the required amount of money required to spend on this. Like he had said, what is the revenue expected from 4,000 megawatts? Let's do the calculation. Can that even buy a 100 MVA transformer?
Okay, Engineer, as we begin to wrap up, because we're trying to manage time, I just want you and Engineer Wonodi to respond to this statement that someone sent to me. He says, the major problems with the power sector can be summarized as corruption, 1. 2, lack of funding. But where funding is available, corrupt TCN and bureaucracy misappropriate and misapply the funds. 3, the current executives in TCN and the entire power sector are generally incompetent and the worst ever manning the TCN. I know them very well. Well, this person was, I won't name him, but he was once a director of the TCN. These are his views. Do you agree? Let's start with Engineer Wonodi, and then I'll come back to you. Very quickly, briefly, because we're wrapping up now.
Dr. Abati, the comment by whoever sent you that, I think it would have been fair if he also asked you to quote his name. But because he didn't say that, but it is true that there is a challenge, there's corruption in the system, but it's not something to begin to personalize because I don't have that detail. But definitely, like I said to you, you can see the challenges of funding for TCN and the fact that whenever the government does things like this, there's challenge for value for money, and then also the issue of citing the projects are not optimal. So that's summarizing. It's not the best it can be. It could definitely be better, but it's not an individual thing. It's a system thing that needs to be totally reorganized, and the leadership needs to do something about the way the system, or at least not system, but the way the industry is it's organized. Thank you very much.
Engineer Onikoyi, as we begin to wrap up.
Yeah, corruption, it happens everywhere.
Does that justify it?
For the corruption issue, I don't want us to, because I don't say anywhere there is no corruption in Nigeria. That is synonymous with Nigeria.
Our national identity.
I don't know.
That's what you're saying.
The synonymous. I'm not saying identity. So on the issue, of the people there incompetent, you will say somebody is incompetent when you give him the tools to work with. As an engineer, if I have to be running every time to try to stabilize a system that's supposed to have been upgraded, and you say I'm incompetent because I'm not giving out the value, that would be unfair to the engineer. So he has mentioned some. We have a lot of redundancy in somewhere. Well, in this country, we work with patronage. Patronage. We want this for my community, we want this, despite the fact that you know that there are other communities who needs it more than your community. Like I said, we have a lot of transformers somewhere that are redundant. And whereas, because transformers are blowing up other places.
Okay, thank you very much, Engineer Onikoyi, and thank you to Engineer Wonodi for joining us.